All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from respective time zones. So for me, it's morning. So I'm a lot more comfortable. For most of you from India, probably it would be evening. So we'll try to finish it in time. Usually it takes 1 hour, 1 or 15 minutes. So we try to finish it in time. So not a problem. So I'll be introducing this notion of the entrepreneurship Gyan, TEG, as I usually do. Then I'll invite my co-host Venu to introduce the speaker, Mitesh ji, and then we'll just move forward with the talk, and later we will take the questions. We follow the same format that we have been doing. So we started with this notion of the entrepreneurship Gyan sometime last year, and already Praveen Mallaji was taking care of startup and entrepreneurship special interest group of IIT Bombay Alumni Association, and then I took over from him sometime around this time, May last year, and then I discussed it with my teammates, Mosmi and others, and we started with this particular event, the Entrepreneurship Gyan. And the idea is to have these kind of talks and discussions, which would help upcoming entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, but also probably would be of interest to people who need help in any particular domain. So we had in the past we had speakers from different aspects. So I try to keep a mix of paper, policy, and practice, as I call it. So paper is academia, and practice is the corporate world. People like Mitesh, who has good experience from the corporate world, from the startups world, but also from the policy dimension, as we had our inaugural session by policymakers, but also we had other people. We had Kamal Rekhi ji in the past as well, who was a prominent entrepreneur. And then we had professors from Babson College, for example, in the past. So we had different, kind of people who had, bring about different dimensions of entrepreneurship into picture. Specifically from kind of funding bodies, we had Amit last year from our ventures fund, and now we have another Mitesh from another investing body, which who would bring a different dimension. So this, I'm guessing it's more going to be like a training workshop on due diligence, that as I understand, and less of a Gyan kind of a talk. So probably you would enjoy it and have your learnings from this workshop. But that's the whole idea, that if we have these learnings, we have these talks ongoing, we have an active group which kind of functions as a platform. But we are also coming up with an actual platform where mentors who are experts in their respective domains, who have knowledge and who have faced these struggles in the past, can help the upcoming entrepreneurs and the young entrepreneurs, an actual platform as well in the future. So I won't waste more time. I will ask my colleague Venu to introduce the speaker, and then we can move ahead.
Sure, thanks, Weber. And I think that's a very, very good intro both to TG as well as to the session. And just to fill in a lot more in detail, of course, we have our speaker, Mitesh ji, who's a seasoned finance and strategy expert with over 15 years of hands-on experience in the dynamic world of startups and angel investing. He brings forth a rich background, in, which includes spearheading finance departments at Book My Show. He's played a pivotal role in the evolution of one of India's biggest cab startups, Ola. His track record speaks volumes on leading IPOs and orchestrating exclusive global licensing deals for branded names such as Being Human by Salman Khan. So I'm sure a lot of the Gyan that he's giving to us in some way or the other is aspirational, if not inquisitive areas for us to delve into and understand. So this not just speaks to his financial acumen, but his ability in navigating high stake negotiations and cultivating strategic partnerships on a global scale. These qualities, I'm sure, are important, not just in his field, but can be leveraged to fields other than directly going out in the market and bringing forth a client specific sort of roles, because he's also focused on driving innovation and growth in a lot of firms. For example, he's a key player at Pisces Capital, specializing in VC investments and early growth startup stages. So hopefully we get to learn how do you identify high growth areas, how do you enter them, and at what valuation, how do you go through some of these aspects, what decisions go on in your mind when you start looking at these, how do you take something from a startup to a seed to a Series A or B funding. So a lot of these Gyan is what we're looking forward to, and his role at Inflection Point Ventures also may give us insights into some of these decision making. So we welcome you, Miteshi, to the platform, and hopefully look forward to learning a lot from your experience and have some takeaways for us to ponder over after the session. Over to you now.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Venu, for that generous introduction, and thanks, Vaibhav. I think quite a intriguing initiative this is TEG. And the moment I got the invite, I said definitely I'm doing it. But I think thanks to all of you guys for joining. I know it's Saturday evening, peak of weekend time. We usually have our investor session on Saturday morning. And there too people say that yeah, Saturday ko weekend pe kyun karte ho? And then Saturday evening 8:30, I'm standing between you and your family and your fun time. And that too with a all important RCB CSK match going on. So I know the kind of, or rather you would know the kind of pressure I'm right now under. And that too with an audience of all IIT Bombay alumni. So I think I really have to be at the top of my game to make this an interesting and worthwhile one session. But I do believe that the topic is really, really interesting. It's close to my heart as I have been part of startup ecosystem for more than a decade now. And the kind of experiences I've gained over the years with Ola, with Book My Show, and now in my avatar wearing the investor hat with IPV and Physis Capital. I think some great learnings. And that's why I think when I joined initially, the context or the meaning of word due diligence that I had, right? And a lot of you will also have. I hope I can change that a little bit in the context of startup with today's session. But two requests. One, I would like to make this an interactive one. So feel free to kind of chip in with your questions on the chat window in between. And second, feel free to ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer. Even post this call, you guys can reach out to me and would love to, entertain your questions, or please share your experiences also when it comes to diligence. So would love to understand that. Quick introduction of IPV. I'm not sure how many of you know about IPV Inflection Point Ventures. It's truly a group for investors, by investors, of investors. So, with our CFO avatar, me and my co-founder Vinay and Ankur set up IPV around 2018, right, as a weekend passion project. We were still in our full-time job, right? And then within a year, we realized that the opportunity is much larger. So in the last 4 years, ever since we moved full-time into IPV since 2019, we have evaluated close to 18,000 odd startups, right? And with multiple layer of filtering by our expert panel, by our team, by ourselves, and finally by investors, we have funded only 1% of that. So out of this 18,000 odd evaluated, we have funded about 195 so far. And that's the reason success rate is very, very high. Almost 50% success rate with 39% odd IRR. I think for any asset class, this will have to be the benchmark, especially one like startup, which is very high risk but high reward sort of an asset class. But it requires a lot of patience, and I'm going to touch upon that. And what started as a, initially, a modest member base, innovative, disruptive idea, but more on a trial basis. In 2018, we had about 50 members. 2019 went up to about 500. Today, we boast of close to 16,000 plus investors on the platform. And we boast of being India's largest angel investment fund with a corpus of close to 700 CR. And with 200 startups, of which almost 100 are already successful. That's the sort of track record that we have. And this is all a result of, an approach that we have followed in selecting the best ideas. I'm addressing an August audience, which I'm sure will have a lot of ideas around startup world as well. But typically, I think one of the largest myths that we always face, especially with early stage investment, is that, it's like spray and pray. 20 में इन्वेस्ट करो, किस्मत अच्छी होगी तो 2 या 3 सक्सेसफुल होंगे, and these 2 or 3 will kind of make up for all your other lost one. So here, this is a world where mortality rate is 90%. 10% should be successful, and this 10% should cover for all the other 90% losses that you'll have, right? And just invest. The more you invest, the more success it will be. And then, it's just like, uh, one fine day, one startup will raise a Series D, Series E. One of your portfolio will be Ola or Flipkart, right, or something, and then that will kind of return. But trust me, it doesn't work like that. Amongst 100,000 plus startup that India has seen, we know how many unicorns that we have, right? But the learning again is that to be a successful investor, you don't only need to be investing in a unicorn. There are multiple ways of higher IRR. As we invest at early stage, our IRR is 40%, and we have had 2 unicorn in our portfolio. But that doesn't mean that there have not been many winners, right? So I'm going to take you through that. Next slide. Cool. So I think getting to the topic of today's topic, which is diligence, there are a few names that I have put on this slide. So Zilingo, Go Mechanic, Food Panda, Housing.com, Broker Network, Mojucare, FTX, Theranos. N is Nikki, one of our portfolio companies. A lot of you might not be aware. But what do you think? What's the similarity between all of this? You can put your answer on the chat window. I'll wait for quick half a minute for you to share your answers or any guess that you may have. What do you think is the similarity between all of this? Waiting, guys. No answer yet. Venu, Vaibhav, if you would like to speak. Can't hear you.
Yeah, I just realized I was on mute there. I think people are just writing to us one-to-one. You should just write it in the chat with the host can also see your responses. Everyone can see. Just write it in everyone. Essentially, these have all failed or they've been acquired by somebody else.
Okay, that's one answer. All have failed. All have been acquired by somebody else. Any other perspective? You're close, Venu, but not fully there yet. All right. Okay. In the interest of time, I'll go ahead. Yes, these all have failed. Yes, these all have been acquired, maybe at penny's value, but these all have failed because of a corporate governance fraud or a miss by the investor in identifying the issue within the startup, or a miss in some cases like going in by even by the founder to identify some of the issues or some of the rampant, governance issues or fraud happening within the company, right? And all of this, right? Theronas, I don't know how many of you, heard the story of Elizabeth Holmes, right? Right, which is at one point in time reached a valuation of $10 billion and raised more than $400 million of investor money. Claim to have a disruptive technology where just by a prick, they'll be able to give you an entire history in like 10 minutes with a blood sample and all. And ultimately, it turned out that they never had such technology and all, and it was all a sham, right? So all of these have gone through something similar at some point in time, right? Where governance have failed, and in most of the cases by fraud, right? This is where a classic diligence in case of a startup comes into play, right? So moving to the next slide, how normal diligence doesn't work over here, right? So what do you think when you think of the word diligence? Like most of us, let's say if we are from BFSI industry or somebody who's part of a listed company or unlisted company, which have ever been gone through diligence, and on both sides of the table, somewhere we as consultant would have performed diligence, somewhere the entities that we work for have been under due diligence by investor or somebody. Typically, the way we think of diligence is it's methodical. There is a set of template which is given for the classic questions. It's quite mundane, the kind of questions you are being asked and you have to follow, right? And it is largely document driven. Dropbox banao, एक data room create करो, वहाँ पे सारे data dump करो, and the big four, the financial auditor or the law firm, the legal auditor will go through the documents, will come back to you with their queries, you solve for it, and yes, diligence is done, right? So audited statement checking, assessment of MIS, previous round funding, review of legal documents, right? Key agreement review. This is basically what we think of when it comes to diligence. Now, tell me is the answer going to be different in terms of the diligence approach? If I were to tell you that we are going to diligence a startup which is less than 1 year old, has only a team of 5 to 7 people, and has not even started making revenue. It's a pre-revenue business that I'm looking at funding, right? In some cases, even pre-product, even the product or the offering is not fully ready. Just a small team and has been in existence for less than a year. Now, what will you diligence in this? Right? There is no balance sheet also. Pehla to saal hai, where the first financial year is just going to end. Right? Probably they don't even have an accountant, so they don't have books of account. Now, in this situation, what sort of due diligence you will follow? Right? And that's where I think our skill as early stage investor in doing this diligence, not by a third party agency, but by ourselves, what we call as business diligence and founder diligence, that comes into play. Next slide. Cool. So I think myths surrounding due diligence process and what we bust, these myths, right? So first, DD is only a post-mortem exercise. It is only for past period. जितने financial year complete हो गए उसका data दिखाओ, जितने agreement हो गए उसका data दिखाओ, and we'll do the DD based on that. A classic, prospectus, DRHP, RHP based diligence, right? In case of startup, when we talk about diligence, it's a more forward-looking exercise. I look at the potential of the business and not the past of the business. Like I said, in most of the cases, there is no past only. It has just started. It is just kind of have come into existence now. What do you do in terms of diligence of past? It's more about the ability of the investor to understand the potential that business has to offer in terms of revenue, business, value creation for investor, and a lot of other things. Second, DD is only about financial reports auditing and legal or governance checks. Right? Wrong. DD should be predominantly focused on business model evaluation. Right? Financial statements, please understand, is a lag indicator. Lead indicator for me, when I invest into a certain company as an investor, one important learning that I've had in my career of 20 years overall and as an investor of a decade more or more than a decade is that more important are non-financial metrics and not financial metrics. Because financial metrics are the result of the hard work that has gone into non-financial metrics. What do I mean by that? I'd like to see how many customers you have acquired rather than how many revenue you are doing. I would like to see what's your repeat rate of the customers. I would like to see what's the NPS, which is net promoter score. What's your customer satisfaction index before I look at your revenue. Revenue to kahin se bhi aa jayega. I'll spend marketing money of 5 crore and will get revenue of 2 crore. Right? What is important is this revenue sustainable? Is this revenue which is going to stay? Is the problem statement real? That's what we cover in the DD that we do as business DD. Third, DD can be conducted only by reputed audit and law firm, right? People say that, okay, Big Four ko de do, give it to a big law firm, and that report will count for something. Because ultimately we need a brand to do the DD, to give credibility to the entire DD report. Wrong. DD should be driven primarily by investment professionals like ourselves only, with the help of subject matter experts. So based on the industry, we will have a subject matter expert working with us and helping us with the due diligence, depending on fintech, health tech, space tech, climate tech, right? B2C brands, D2C brands, deep tech, enterprise sales, and like the list goes on. So you need a subject matter expert who help you understand the domain, but it's ultimately my own intuition and my own understanding of dealing with several businesses, right? Having personally invested in 150 odd startups. It's the cumulative experience of working on both sides of the table as CFO myself of companies like Being Human, Ola, and Book My Show. And now as an investor, having invested in companies like BharatPay, Park Plus, OTP, Vested, Beardo, and a lot of others. So it's the experience of having looked at different sectors that comes into play over here, right? Next is DD is to be conducted only before the investment. Again, a classic myth that once the investment is getting done, before you kind of invest into the company, do all the DD that you want to, uske baad there is nothing that you do. Again, DD is an ongoing exercise. Very, very important to know that, because it's not something that you're going to do only before investment. It's very important to reckon that founder has been able to live up to their claim, what were made while the investment was under consideration. And hence, it is always a continuous exercise about their ability to execute when the money has gone to them. Fifth, DD is an inward-looking exercise and conducted only on founders and business. Again, wrong. DD is a holistic exercise where we cover the market scope as well. For us, when we invest into a startup, one fundamental rule again that we follow is that size of the pie always matters more than share of the pie, right? If the market is very, very small and the company that we're willing to invest into is 90% owner of that market, doesn't make sense to me. Because if the market is not going to expand, that means I'm dealing with a company which is going to have be stagnant. There'll be no growth. Unless market is growing, right? The company that I'm going to invest into will never be able to grow. So very, very important as part of DD to understand the target market itself, right? To understand the regulations around it, to understand the competitive landscape that the company is going to face, right? Startup will have a lot of competition, direct and indirect. So important to understand all of this, important to understand where my exit is going to come, right? Like one question that I ask my investor is that when do you start preparing for exit when you invest? And people say that needs patience, you need to have 5 years vision. Somebody says that okay, 2 years you start getting idea. Somebody said that okay, exit is not in your hand, it can come whenever it has to come. The real answer is that we start preparing for the exit at the time when we invest itself. I should know at least whether my investor who is going to give me exit is going to be a VC, is going to be a PE, the company is going to go IPO, or the company is going to be acquired by a strategic player, right? That ballpark idea I need to have so that accordingly I can plan the business going forward. And finally, mature businesses with large VC investors on board do not require DD, right? And that's where I think the first slide is handy. All of them had raised large amount of money from very, very large and reputed VCs. All of them, the names that you saw over there. FTX, classic case, right? And we've seen all of these kind of going bust. Just because a reputed investor is on table, entity like Nikki that we just spoke about, boasted of, it boasts of investors like who's who of India's, angel investment world, or even some reputed businessmen, but they're on the cap table, yet it failed. So I think it can be coming from anywhere, sometimes poor judgment by the founders, not necessarily always governance issues, but it can be any reason. So DD has to be a continuous exercise where you are able to do course correction, irrespective of who's part of the cap table, who are the investors in the company. Next. Great. So what do we follow over here? What is the evaluation process that we follow at IPV? Right? Very simple 3 rules. Invest in great businesses, which are run by great founders, which are available at fair valuation. All three are equally important. One of them is missing and we don't have a deal, right? There may be great business, there may be very, very cheap valuation, but if the founding team is not great, founding team doesn't understand the sector, founding team doesn't have the required expertise, or founding team doesn't have the required skill to execute it, you have failure in hand, right? If the founding team is good, the business is great. You're looking at space tech, which is rising fast today, climate tech, right? A lot of other sectors which are like sunrise industry, renewable energy, EV. Everybody's going after EV, right? But if it is not available at fair valuation, I think I'll have hard time as an investor. I still may be able to save my money. The business still may be great. I will not make any return on that. So again, not a great investment idea. And same way, if you have a great founder also coming in at good valuation also, if the space is not big, if the business itself, sector itself is not growing, then you can't do much about it. Like the example that I said, that no point investing in a company with a 90% market share of a space which is not growing or which is very, very tiny. Right. So these are some of the pillars. I'll not go into details over here in the interest of time, but these are the pillars to evaluate what is a great business, what is great founders, what are they made up of, what is fair valuation in terms of when you invest into a company. Next slide. We are going to go into few details of each of these pillars, right, and play some interesting stuff over here. So the man on the left, by for guessing, Mr. Warren Buffett, some of one of the visionary that we follow whenever it comes to investment, right? Very clearly he lays it out, right? When a management with a reputation for brilliance tackles a business with a reputation for bad economics, it's the reputation of the business that remains intact, right? Like very few have been successful in airline business, like very few will be successful in gambling business, right? In terms of creating value for investors. So there are enough and more examples around it where the founder will be great, but if the business doesn't have the reputation or can't make money, there's no point investing in that business, right? So at IPV, we follow Porter's 5 forces whenever we evaluate a business, which is, evaluate it from the perspective of threat of new entrants, bargaining power of supplier, threat of substitutes, bargaining power of buyers, which is customers, and finally the industry rivalry, which is competitive landscape. Next. Good. So no market need. This is one of the reasons for failure. Now let's look at Few reasons for failure of the business. No market need, product mistime. Classic example, I worked with Book My Show as CFO for about 4.5 years. Now, Book My Show as a company was born in 1999, like way before even the startup term probably would have been coined, right? So they were coined there. They started as, again, online movie ticket booking app, but it was being done on telephone, right? It was launched at a time when there were no multiplexes in India. There were only single screen cinema, which in order to avoid tax were very, very reluctant to actually open their inventory to portals like Book My Show. Saying that the moment I put it over there, my ability to kind of do black marketing goes away, right? And hence, I think within 5-6 years, in spite of having backup of, giant behemoths like Star behind them, the product didn't work. It failed. They went back to the drawing board, again made tweaks to the product, understood the market better. Between 2005 to 2007, the multiplexes kind of came up, on the scene. 2007, again, Book My Show with the current name got launched. Earlier, the name was different. And 2007 onwards, there was no looking back because the digitization came into picture. We had better networks, we had better infrastructure, we had better tax rules, right? And that kind of gave rise to a ecosystem where transparency was hygiene, transparency was required, and that made Book My Show successful. So timing of the product is also very, very important when you look at market need or success of a startup. Next.
What factors actually matter the most for startup success? First, the idea. I used to think that the idea was everything. But then over time, I came to think that maybe the team, the execution, adaptability, that mattered even more than the idea. Then I started looking at the business model. Does the company have a very clear path to generating customer revenues? Then I looked at the funding. Sometimes companies received intense amount of funding. And then, of course, to timing.
Okay. So you have any issue with the videos? I mean, I hope we are able to control the time then. Just in the interest of time, we might not play all the videos. So let's skip this. Next. Cool. Second is ignoring customer, right? A lot of startups that we meet believe that investors are the most important piece in the overall toy wheel. Fatal mistake. Investors are just going to help you with money. Ultimately, this money has to be put behind creating an ecosystem which satisfy customer, right? For any business, what is most important in the order, in the exactly the same order, is first your employees, second your customers, and third is investor. This is the order. No matter whatever industry, no matter whatever is the scale of the business, no matter whoever is funding it, right? So very, very important not to ignore customers, right? As Steve Jobs said, start with customer experience and work backwards towards technology. You can't say that my technology is best unless customer are able to make use of it. If customer are not happy, you're not going to do anything with the technology. Look at how Nokia collapsed when Apple came, right? Or look at how Sony kind of collapsed when Samsung came. So this is basically where the customer focus approach, where you listen to the customer, that is very, very important, right? Include few of the points that we cover in due diligence, like customer feedback. I just spoke about customer stickiness, customer cohorts, repeat rate. Cohorts are very important. As you see on the right hand side, this is something that we cover in our scorecard. We have a proprietary scorecard on the basis of which we evaluate startups. I'm going to share a slide. How does the scorecard look towards the end of the presentation? But very, very important to measure the stickiness of the customer. It's easy to acquire a customer by spending money once. What is important is that customer coming back? Because I can't be spending on acquiring the customer again and again. Ultimately, my product or my service should speak for itself if the customer were to be retained and grow the business. Next. User-unfriendly product, right? Ultimately, user has to be liking the product, and you have to believe that user is not a very, very smart fellow or a tech-savvy fellow. It needs to be as simple as that, right? Nobody uses SMSs anymore. People have moved, the world has moved to WhatsApp. Right? People continue to use Zoom in spite of other benefits. BlackBerry, which used to be the phone at one point in time, today hardly gets talked about. Apple has taken over completely. So unless you listen to the user, right? And unless you solve the given problem effectively by listening to the user and giving them that quality product, you are not going to succeed. Next. Got out competed. Very, very important, right? A lot of these products when they live in their world of their own legacy, right, and do not come out of that, they get out-competed very, very easily. Jet Airways, Indigo. I like to play this video, a short video by none other than Kunal Shah, right, the founder of Freecharge, Cred, and a lot of such successful businesses. We can play the video here, Shivam.
A railway ticket in India? Please raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have experienced both the formats, offline, and how many of you have used online? Okay, great. A question for you. If you have to give a score of efficiency out of 10 for the old behavior, that is going to the railway station, standing in the queue or whatever that is, versus going to IRCTC, what is the score you will give out of 10 for the first behavior and the second behavior, state A and state B? 3 and 8. What I have noticed is kind of between that for most people, 2 and 8, right? You will see that the efficiency is dramatically different between the old behavior and the new behavior. And therefore, we have this theory which is called delta 4. Whenever the delta of efficiency is greater than 4, that's where you will unlock the pot of gold. Now, what is the beauty about delta 4s? You will find that they are irreversible. UBP versus USP. All of us know about USP, but the real thing for today's world is UBP, and I'll explain that in a bit. UBP stands for unique brag-worthy proposition. Everybody who will experience a new efficient state will scream at everybody at an inefficient state and tell them to move there. I'll give you a small example. How many of you have used Truecaller in India? Please raise your hand. Okay. How many of you discovered Truecaller because of an advertisement? Nobody. I'll tell you how you all discovered it. Somebody came to you and told you, give me any phone number and I'll tell you the name of the person. And they did a magic trick. And that's how you discovered Truecaller and everybody downloaded it, right? That is unique, brag-worthy proposition. Everybody who moves to an efficient state will scream at everybody at an efficient state and say, hey, move here. You're wasting your time in that inefficient state. Don't go to the railway station to book a ticket. You just move into this. Or don't book the cab in the old way. Book it through Uber or Ola, right? We will scream at the inefficient state and move the humanity forward. But that is only true if the delta is large enough, right? And we have high tolerance for delta 4s. If there is a bad experience with IRCTC, we will continue to use it because there is nothing more efficient than that. The delta 4 exists in that product. The delta 4 exists in Uber and Ola. We'll crib. Why doesn't the driver know how to use maps? Go back to the old behavior and book the other methods. You will not move there because the delta is large enough compared to the previous behavior, right? So what you'll notice is that any product or service that offers.
So I think this sums it up all. I don't need to add anything more, but very, very important to have a product. And myself, having worked for Ola, I know that initially when we launched, people like Meru Cab and Tap Cab and Gold Cabs of the world used to laugh at us, saying that, this is not going to sustain. How do you kind of drive customer experience if the cab is not owned by you? You don't have control over that and other things. But very soon, within less than a year, they got out-competed because they just could not match. And then eventually they tried to kind of tweak their business model to follow Ola, but they just could not sustain. I think the ship had sailed by then. So very, very important to keep pace with the changing technology and create that delta, which just Kunal spoke about. Next. Right. No relevant business or pivot gone bad, right? Very important again. Startups don't fail because they lack a product. They fail because they lack customers and a profitable business model. In our language, in startup world, we say a solution chasing a problem. A lot of times startups are made up of just like that, okay, एक idea है, उसका कुछ कर देते हैं. Are you solving a genuine problem where the need exists, right? If you fail to innovate, right, then you are planning to fail. Very, very simple. Look at Kodak, world's largest camera company at one point in time. Kodak disappeared because nobody uses camera anymore. It's the smartphone which has replaced that, right? And a lot of such examples. Geo came, replaced so many other things. So I think it's that innovation, it's that technology, it's that focus on creating a business model which is sustainable for all stakeholders. That's very, very important to keep in mind. Next. Right. Pricing, cost issues, unit economics. A lot of time, the common question that we be asked that I don't know startups, how do they survive? The kind of money that they burn, right? Is this even sustainable? Is this gross? This is where unit economics comes into play, right? Now, again, a very interesting video by Kunal, where he talks about, the importance of unit economics. We can play this video, Shivam, for 2 minutes.
This. You will also observe sometimes that the delta 4 behavior is not just function of efficiency, but also affordability. Sometimes the delta 4, let's say flights are more efficient than trains, but nobody is moving to flights as much because they cannot afford it. But what if they can afford it? They will not use the trains anymore, right? Therefore, it is important to understand the affordability angle also over here. So going back over here, whenever the delta is less than 4, right, you will observe that it does not really create wealth or stay there. It sometimes even retains the wealth. Sometimes what happens, however, is that people pour in more money to increase the delta, right? For example, I will start offering 30% discount on shirts to increase the delta artificially. The natural product does not have the delta, so I put more money to just artificially increase the delta, and therefore you will see it will actually erode wealth. A lot of times, in fact 99% of times, I have seen entrepreneurs pick ideas that do not even have delta 1, right? And I'll tell you why they do that. They pick the ideas from the West and China and try to copy it over here. Here's the problem to that. Let's just imagine for a second. I have less time, I need to get my clothes washed. Western option, let's create a laundry startup. I'll tell you what is a more efficient solution in India, which all of you are already doing. Get a domestic maid. That is the more efficient solution than versus using a laundry startup. But guess what? Close to 5-6 startups got funded millions of dollars for running laundry startups, which was not a delta 4 behavior.
Right. So this is basically about understanding that how cost issues work. What's the need to create an entire laundry startup when labor is available in abundant supply today also? We'll have maids as we want. We'll have dhobi. We'll have the laundry guy coming at our doorstep. There's no real need for a startup. It will, in fact, will never have positive unit economics. It will never be able to create that sort of a delta. So important in diligence to analyze margins and analyze variable expenses to drive CAC. Next. Fail to scale, geographical expansion. Very, very important that they are able to scale. Some of these ideas which are not able to scale, initially they will have some sort of a blip that they'll be able to create, but in long term, like how many of us, people like us on the wrong side of 40 probably would have started with this platform called Orkut, right? How many of us have used it? Maybe you raise your hand. Nothing to be ashamed about. I think we all were on Orkut at some point in time because Facebook came and swept the carpet under their feet. But these are the network effects, because if all of my friends are on Facebook, people will immediately move to Facebook, right? Now, today, the world has again changed. We uncle aunties are on Facebook. So our kids don't like to be on Facebook. Kids actually want to be on Insta and Snap and other, the new relevant platforms. Facebook is only for dada, dadi, mama, mami, uncle, auntie, right? So things are changing very, very fast. And that's what is called the scale, geographical expansion, or even network expansion. Scalability only comes from that. Next. Yeah, and important, last but not the least, legal challenges. Now, very, very important take over here that I have is that there are something which are criminal and there are something which are not recognized by law yet, right? We'll give you a classic example. When we again started Ola, initially we faced a lot of issues from law because our laws were drafted when mobile phone didn't exist, right? So the regulator failed to understand that how can you actually book a cab through mobile? They kept telling us, okay, why don't you go for radio taxi license? You need to have a radio taxi license if you are operating cab in the country. And all the time we used to explain them that we are not a cab company, we are a technology company. Cab is just means to an end. Cab is the ultimate vehicle that we are using to satisfy a customer need, which is passenger. Today it is cab, tomorrow it will be bikes, day after it will be auto, and after that it will be bus as well. So the vehicle will keep changing and we are just kind of satisfying a need, satisfying a problem statement. It took them almost 4 years to understand this. And then you saw, the birth at even airport or base for Ola and Uber. And today cab aggregator is a well-regulated thing, right? But you need to educate the lawmaker. Luckily with the current government, it's very, very simple. And they are open to kind of all of these disruptions, right? It's just that it needs a little bit of time for educating the relevant stakeholders. These are legal challenges, but it doesn't make your business illegal. It doesn't make your business unlawful. What happened with crypto is another example, right? Today, crypto startups are still operating outside India, but India, the RBI will never kind of allow, right? But people have moved to Singapore and Malta and Dubai and where not, and still kind of operating, right? But it's debatable. It's gray area. Online pharmacy was banned by Supreme Court. There is a ruling where it said that e-pharmacy is not allowed. COVID came and that became the way of life. We didn't have any other choice but to order through PharmEasy and the rest of the world, right? So I think it's about the timing. It's about how you tackle this. It's about how you educate the lawmaker and make sure that it is nothing criminal. It is not illegal. It's just the way that the business is being run, and you need to kind of comply or make the law changes. Give the government enough time to recognize the need on both sides. With Ola, I think the larger pressure came from the drivers themselves, saying that this is so good for us. We were just standing at one corner waiting for the passenger to come. Today, we are able to kind of do 12, 14 rides a day. It's all the more important for both passenger as well as driver. So I think this is something that we need to educate people and drive the business where it is beneficial to all. But personally, I love businesses which are initially legally challenged. You may ask why. I'll tell you, because the kind of value creation that can happen over here when the regulations kind of ease out, when the entrepreneur is able to kind of carve out rule for themselves. My first investment as an angel was in a peer-to-peer lending company. A peer-to-peer lending company in 2014 was something which was unheard of. People will say that if I need a loan, I will either go to a bank or an NBFC or maybe a money lender or somebody else, right? But I can't borrow from somebody else and can't expect that to be legal. So the entrepreneur set that up, started that, right? And eventually then he got a notice from RBI and all. It required some amount of education and all. And today there are P2P NBFCs. So there is a specific license that RBI then came up with. And today this company called Lenden Club is the largest P2P lender in the country, right? And when I invested at the early stage at a valuation of sub $1 million, company raised the last round at a valuation of $50 million. The next round will be at $150 million. Now imagine the kind of value it created over, though 10 years for me, but in 10 years, it has significantly surpassed any other asset class in terms of value creation. So this is the benefit when you invest in a slightly risky idea, knowing that it's just about complying with the regulations eventually over a period of time. Otherwise, it's nothing criminal or nothing illegal. Next. Great founders, I think very, very important. Shivam, do we have a video over here by Sanjeev Bikhchandani?
So, agar aapko theek hai, as an angel, you have to be supportive, boss. You have to be supportive. The second thing is you got to understand that nobody becomes an entrepreneur because he's looking for a new boss.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, as an angel, if you try and act like his or her boss, the truth is the founder might shut you out. If the founder shuts you out, there's nothing you can do. Aapka paisa ja chuka hai. It is lower than unsecured debt in terms of security. अब he doesn't let you in, information share नहीं हो रही है, मीटिंग नहीं कर रहा है, तुम क्या करोगे यार? आपको नौकरी करनी है, आपका 10 और पोर्टफोलियो कंपनी है. So building rapport with the entrepreneur is key. Chemistry with the entrepreneur is key. Second was अगर आपके पास 50 angel है through IPO on the same cap table, the founder cannot deal with 50 people there.
Correct.
Deal 1, 2 max. And those 1 or 2 are the right ones.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think sir, absolutely. यही हमने सीखा यहाँ पे और हम एक ही जन को डील करते हैं IPO से.
And that person should be mature enough to understand that my job is to nudge and not to instruct.
Totally, yeah.
You start instructing.
Thanks. We can stop it.
Shut you out.
So this is Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, by the way, founder of InfoEdge, one of the most successful startup itself in the country, I would say. The amount of startups that they have invested into and made successful returns like Zomato, like a lot of others, that is phenomenal. And this is him talking about how to handle founders. Ultimately, you are investing in that person. You can't run the business without him. You can't really replace him. Impossible. A lot of people have tried saying that, okay, management team revamp kar denge, naye founder ko leke aayenge. Doesn't work. The DNA of the startup is because of that founder, right? So at the time of investment itself, if you choose the wrong founder, your money is gone. So these are the 7 important pillars that we analyze a particular founder based upon. Is he visionary? Second, how's the leadership skill within the organization? Because ultimately he'll have to create a large team, right, which are well motivated and passionate. So what's his own motivation or passion, his or her? The execution ability of the founding team, the experimental mindset. Are they shy of experimenting? Are they shy of failing? The problem solving ability of the founder. Every day there'll be a new challenge. Every day there'll be a new problem. Whether they are up to kind of take these challenges and the problem solving ability of them. Finally, the networking ability of the founder. Very important that they are able to kind of narrate their story in a right way to a network of people. They have access to a network of people, their investors, their partners, their vendors, and a lot of other things. So these are the things which are important to understand when you analyze a founder. Next. Vaibhav, Venu, I'll take 5 more minutes if it's okay. Then we'll just end the presentation and we'll have questions.
Sure, that's fine.
So founder analysis, these are a few of the questions that we ask, and this is how in scorecard, the analysis looks like on the right-hand side, right? So ability to answer questions from subject matter experts, deep domain knowledge, right? One or 2 points that I'll pick up, single founder company. Very important to understand, we normally do not invest in companies which are driven by single founder. Why? Because then you are exposed to the whims and fancies of a single person. God forbid tomorrow something wrong goes with him or her, there is nobody else to fall back on. He may be able to create a team of managerial personnel, right, or senior people, but founder is founder. So typically, I think a founding team with 2 or 3 people, not more than 3 also, coming from different domains, which is one handling tech, one handling business, one handling operations. That's the ideal team for us, because God forbid something happens to one of them, the other 1 or 2 should be able to take control of the business. Next. Right. Now, very, very important, right? If you look at this P&L, how does it look like? Is this an investable business? The company is doing almost $1 million plus in revenue, right? Making an EBITDA of $350,000 a year. Is this a great investable business? You can put it on chat window, yes or no. Yes, of course, right? This is okay. Mr. Dhira says no. Would love to understand his perspective, but I think the answer is actually enough, not enough details to know yet. You should be asking some more questions. Now, what are these? Shivam, go ahead. Cool. Now, if you look at this P&L, which is the balance sheet of the company, right? The right side statement, not P&L, sorry, the balance sheet of the company. You'll realize that to make a profit of $350,000, he has an average receivable days of 11 months. The money which is coming from his debtors, probably selling to government or probably selling to some buyer, right? It's paying him the money only after 10 to 11 months, right? So while the EBITDA margin is 31%, but the kind of working capital requirement that he has and the kind of receivable risk that the founder carries, that is enormously higher, because his payable days are just 1 month. He's not able to take credit from the supplier. On the other hand, he has to extend all the credit in the world to the buyer. Now, for him to scale, that means that for striking 100 rupees of revenue, he'll need to back it with working capital of 80 to 90 rupees every time, right? Unsustainable business. One buyer will fail and his entire profit will be wiped off. So that's why we always say profit and loss is vanity, balance sheet is sanity, but cash flow is reality. Ultimately, how soon you are able to realize cash, that's the most important thing that one needs to answer. Next. Cool. So I think feedback from stakeholder is something that we value very, very important. So any startup that we invest in, we meet these 4 stakeholders, which is customer, their supplier, their existing investor, if any, and the SME, which is the subject matter expert in that particular industry, and that cover it in our due diligence analysis that is presented to investors. Next. Great. Cap table, very, very important. What is cap table? Cap table is nothing but the capitalization table, which speaks about the overall shareholding pattern of a company. We do not like startups where founder holds less than 50% or less than 60% in the second or third round of investment itself. Now, this is a company where on paper, everything looks good. Eventually, when it does the next round or 2 more rounds of funding, if the founding team's shareholding is going to go below 25, 20% and all, there will be no skin left in the game for them, right? Vis-a-vis so many investors on the cap table, if the investors' rights are not defined clearly, chances are that there will be disputes within the company in terms of their rights and responsibilities. So very, very important to understand that who's there on the cap table, what sort of right they have, what sort of skin in the game that the founding team also has. Are there enough ESOPs created for the employees, which will kind of encourage new employees to join the company, and they see also value creation. And hence we pay good amount of importance, study the cap table before you invest into any. Next. Great. Some key shareholder rights. I think this is a topic for a full-fledged session again. Would love to take that. Very important to understand the shareholder agreement. Typically, a lot of businesses, success is wiped off or investors' value is wiped off because they could not negotiate proper shareholder rights for themselves. Right? If the founder is able to raise the next round without your consent, imagine you had invested at 100 rupees in a company without any reserve matter rights or shareholder rights. Founder goes and raises the next round of funding at 50 rupees. Your value is diluted at that point in time itself. Very important to have anti-dilution rights in that case. That if the founder is diluting my wealth by half, I should be allocated double the number of shares that I had. So these are just some of the examples that I'm saying. In the interest of time, we'll not go deep into this. But trust me, I think this is very, very important and very interesting. I'm sure you'll like it. It's very fascinating when you understand the various impact of shareholder agreement itself. Next. Cool. So I think this is the evaluation of startup the IPV way. Investor view, disruptive aspect, customer attraction, supply chain, quality of the business, substitute, which is for that startup, founders or promoters, and finally scalability. How much scalable is the idea? It's basically within this 8 parameters that we value the business. And if you analyze any business within these 8 parameters properly, there are minimal chances there is still something that can go wrong always. But there are very, very unlikely chances that you'll go wrong with your choice of the startup or investment. Next. Okay, this is our portfolio. So, the kind of, we have had of the total portfolio of 190 plus startups, we have had 14 full exits so far and 28 partial exits. So about 42 exits and almost 70 follow-on rounds. So like I said, when this is an asset class where people say that only 10% of the startup will be successful, in our case, it's almost 50%. And doesn't mean that the other 50% are dead. They are at various stages of investment. The money is just being deployed at some stage in time. They will also be successful. Our failure rate, we also have our failure. Next slide. We also have our failures. So far, about 16 startups have failed out of the total portfolio of 195. We look at the reasons for failure very, very closely and learn from our own mistakes. Right? And most of the times, if you see in this slide, these are the 8 startups that failed last year, and we analyze the reasons. You'll find that founder fit problem was the reason for 5 of them, which means we didn't select the founder properly. That's one of the key reasons that most of the startups fail. Next. Great. I think this is something that we spoke about, the deal curation. Very close watch on the number of deals that we are investing and having expert view while analyzing itself. Next. Yeah. So I think this is overall about that I just spoke about. What are the various things that we consider while investing in a startup? Next. And finally, I think all of this being said, right, there is something called investor intuition, right? In spite of all of this Gyan on this TEG forum, right? Something called intuition always plays out. We have gone against our intuition and investing in some startups because all of these things kind of tick the box, and yet we have failed. And somewhere I think we felt that, okay, startup was too early, something was wrong, market was not there. But we went with the intuition, saying that, okay, maybe there is some scope in the future, or the founder is so smart that he will be able to create something new. And then the intuition has worked, right? Nobody thought of demonetization will come. Nobody could gauge COVID will come. So I think it's certain number of times, these are the opportunities which are given by the Almighty. Men kind of grab this opportunity, convert it into success. Boys keep tripping about, that this is a natural disaster and I can't do anything about it. So I think this is where your gut or your intuition about certain companies, certain startups work. And these are few of the startups that we have invested in, and they have been very, very successful, right? Where we invested based on our gut feeling, of course, following the due diligence rule also, but it's about our intuition about the industry and the founding. Great. I think that's the end of the presentation. Would love to see if any question answered, would love to answer them live. Okay, here's your chance to kind of become part of IPV. I do encourage, people, those we meet to join only for the sake of learning. I think for me personally, last decade where I've invested in 150 plus startups, today the best thing about my job is every day kind of listening to new business ideas. Again, being on the wrong side of 40, I'm 44, but when I meet, youngsters half of my age, right, they kind of come up with business ideas which we have never thought of. We were trained differently, we were wired differently, right? Me being a CA, generally we are very risk averse, right? But when we meet these founders and the way they look at problem statement, the way they look at business, it's totally different. There is a lot to learn from them, right? And that's the opportunity for you to be part of IPV and listen to such founder stories every Saturday or every Wednesday when they pitch their new business ideas.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mitesh. That's what I was kind of expecting as well. It would be a lot more of a workshop rather than just some random Gyan session, because we had different kind of these talks in the past. So I see already a question from Bhagwati ji, who was the CEO of the Quetta Center for Digital Health at IIT Bombay. So he has asked, for an Indian startup, if the investor is from outside India, so probably all these things would hold true for Indian startup. But if the investor is from outside India, would you suggest any other specific due diligence?
No, great question, Prasad sir. Not specific due diligence in this case, but you should be mindful of is the repatriability of funds from whatever country that you are investing into India. Because either you can invest through your NRO account in India, which is very simple, or you can invest through NRE account or overseas account. Now, in cases of NRE account or overseas account, you need to see whether the money is repatriable. That means the startup has done the required filing with RBI, which is called FCGPR document. At the time of exit, you will need that document. Then only you can take the money back into your country. Second is the double tax avoidance treaty. Now, being Indian in whatever part of the world that you are in, if you have invested into an Indian startup and if the gain is accruing in India, you will still be required to pay tax in India, right? The entire TDS will be deducted and you will be able to take home only the net money. Now, there are certain countries where we don't have double tax avoidance treaty. So again, you may have to pay tax in your home country as well, which will amount to double taxation. I think very important to study these tax regulations and repatriability rules before you invest into startup from other parts of the country. At IPV, our investor base is spread across 53 different countries. And we take care of all of this support, pre-investment, post-investment, which is very essential for the investor base.
Interesting. Sure. So another question, which I think even I was having when you were going through the slides, especially. So there's this sort of exit point that you had mentioned. Where you get the exit point. That's a key question that we should be asking. Where is the exit? Is it in 1 year? Is it in 6 months? Is it in 2 years? And is it a PE exit or is it an IPO? So I think Prateek has asked this question. How do you understand? What sort of an exit will you get?
Very good question again. So take example, we have invested in a lot of logistics startup, right? I've invested in a company called Urja, right, which is into trucking. So they provide mid-mile logistics solution, which is from the city warehouse or a city dark store to various other hubs within the city. Now, a classic stable business, they will make their 10% EBITDA and all, will grow 10% month on month, very predictable revenue, very predictable profitability and all. Now, this is a classic piece story because I know that today, when I funded them, they were doing about 70, 80 lakhs of revenue a month. Today, they are at about 6 crores a month within 1.5 years of investment. Target within next 2 years, they will be probably doing about 20 crores a month, right? So they'll touch a revenue of about 200 crores. Now, at that point in time, it will become a classic SME IPO story. Or at that point in time, some other large logistic player will acquire them because of the stable business that they have. So this I know is a PE story. This I know is an IPO story. Vis-a-vis something where I've invested in a gaming cloud infrastructure company or I've invested in an EV company. Now, these are companies where I know that P&L will always be under challenge because the amount of R&D expenditure that they'll have to incur, right? That will not allow them to be profitable at least for next 4-5 years. So I know that my exit is going to come from a VC. My exit is going to come from another large strategic player in that industry itself who's going to value them for the product or technology that they've created, or value them for the founding team, or value them for the customer base that they have, and not because of their profitability. So this is something that you analyze when you invest at the first stage itself.
All right. So we are almost done with the time, but we will take another last question that I see from Avi. So he is asking, how does a VC view a startup in which they have invested when it makes a pivot in a very different direction, such as a different market, for example, or something else?
So I think there are two sorts of angle over here. One, and most of the time this is the case where the VC or investor itself kind of agrees with the founder saying that the business needs a pivot. It's not going the way it was designed. Either the external world has changed, making their product, not attuned to the customer needs, or the unit economics have changed, making their product unviable, right? Or they think that it's just impossible to kind of work in the current environment with the current product because the competitive landscape is too difficult. Okay, and then pivot is absolutely essential. I tell you, we were contemplating investing in a startup, very unique startup, very interesting story. Now, this startup, what it does is that, let's say today is Vaibhav's birthday, right, or Venu's birthday. I want to kind of provide a surprise to my friend. This startup will go to an Akshay Kumar, will record a 10-second video from Akshay Kumar saying, "Hey Venu, wish you a very happy birthday," right? "Thanks, my friend. I think let's catch up sometime soon." Now imagine the sense of surprise that Venu will have getting this video from Akshay Kumar. Right? Now this startup, by the way, was a huge hit in US by a company called Cameo. Yeah, Cameo did it. Cameo will go to an Anne Hathaway. Cameo will go to a rock, right? Dwayne Johnson, and will record this video, and people will pay like crazy amount of money also, $10,000 and $20,000 for these messages. India mein nahi chalta. It was a disaster in India. None of the top celebrities kind of signed up for this because they don't want to dilute their market value. Ultimately, they were left with all B and C category of television stars only. So it didn't work. The industry kind of collapsed. And then they had to pivot into something different, which is more related to content or something else, right? And all of them had to do it. This industry had a minimum of 20 such players that I know of. None of them survived. So this is a pivot. Then the investors themselves realized that boss, ye nahi chalega. Laundry startup that Kunal spoke about, right? Laundry startup was a fad at one point in time. All of them collapsed, right? Buy now, pay later was a fad last year, 2 years ago. BNPL didn't work. People then changed the course. So there are a lot of these stories which come once in a while. In between, they are hugely successful, and then suddenly investor or buyers realize that it's not going to work. Then you have to go for pivot.
All right. So we are almost end of this particular session. Venu, final words from you, and then I'll just do the closing remarks.
Sure, Vaibhav. I think like we initially started off by setting very high expectations for Miteshi, and given a lot of the distractions that we had today being a Saturday and with the IPL matches going on, I think it was already adding to the pressure. But I should say definitely thank you for the very engaging session, even though people were virtually connected and they were on mute. I think a lot of participation came in through responses. I know a couple of people kept writing directly to either me or Vaibhav instead of writing it on the group. So you may have seen a fewer responses there, but definitely a lot of traction on some of the questions. And I think just some of these points, when you think of, say, for example, having employees, then customers, and then the investors, the priority for a good startup or for a company in general, I think that metrics is something that is quite in the different order when you look at these companies in general. So more often than not, you'd have first priority as investors or shareholders, then the customers, and finally the employees. And then companies wonder why is the turnaround so high, why is the acquisition so high, and so on. So I think that metric is a good sort of insight that I don't think, at least I did not think of it that way. I know I want it to be that way, but I think that as an evaluation for companies is a new thing that I was introduced to. The other aspect, Mitesh, that I found really interesting, and when you mentioned that UBP, the brag worthiness of a company that we learned through the video, that was something that the moment I heard it, it went to the example of Orkut. I think Orkut to Facebook that had come in during my school days. And then slowly that transitioned to Instagram and Snapchat. So I very, very late, I was trying to delay it, similar to, say, an old timer not switching away from Facebook just because of the number of connections I had. But definitely, I think that pivot in people directly coming in, telling me, oh, you're not on the new platform, this is more happening, switch over. So I think that is what gains viral marketing. And that sort of is a good indication of a fantastic startup that is going to grow into without a lot of the acquisition cost and the metrics that we look at. Separately, I think one of the more nuanced points that I was going through when you were mentioning about how, say, IVP is evaluating these, that framework. So in our current job, or at least people who've been working, say, as consultants or in the different roles, now use some of the technical management theories and so on, like the Porter's five forces. But I think some of that Gyan being applied to people from different walks of life, along with the structured framework on how do you evaluate, I'm sure will add a lot of insight to how people think in some of these startups. So I'm sure this video, once we launch it, Webber, will have a lot of repeat views and, say, new users being viewed across. People who may not have attended our sessions will now start flocking to the next session and so on. So thanks a lot, Mitesh, for the very insightful Gyan today.
Okay, thanks, Venu, and thanks a lot, Mitesh, for your time. One thing when you were talking, because I do in India, I do teach at IIMs as well, and outside India, I do that teach at other institutions as well, is to invite professionals like you for sessions, because you the way you delivered your session is more like a teaching, which is really kind of interesting personally for me. But otherwise, I think if your team could share the slides that were used, and we could share it with our alumni to they get them interested more about the IPV way and how you are doing it. And I think probably they would be very interested to keep this, take away this Gyan with them and probably rewatch the slides and probably get back to you and your groups with some of those questions and some of those doubts and some of those sessions. But overall, it was a really fantastic session, Mitesh, and I probably would look forward to some more synergies in the near future. And probably because we are also planning for a larger event, entrepreneurship event sometime next year. So probably we will see if we could have a lot more synergies for that larger event that we are planning. Yeah, that would be interesting. Thanks a lot for your time. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Vaibhav and Venu. I enjoyed it as much. And trust me, I think it's the passion and the experience that I have gained over years. With practical example, it always kind of makes for a great session. So would love to kind of take.
Which makes you which makes you an investor, good investor probably, but also a nice teacher. That I realized. yeah.
I think losing money makes you the best teacher. That's what I've realized in life.
Yeah, that could be true as well. That could be true as well.
I think it's not the 5 successful investments that have made me wiser. It's that one bad investment that have made me more wiser. So I think
very true. But real life experience, right? Yeah.
I really encourage people to join the network. I think it's the power of working with like-minded people. And we keep having some interesting session every Saturday, right? So where we talk about due diligence, where we talk about valuations, we talk about exits, right? My own experience, like one session I took was about 10 mistakes that I made as an early stage angel investor when I started my journey in the first year. There are certain things that you kind of have in your mind, which are then broken. So I think some great. Thanks for having me, and have a great.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.